afternoon and welcome to a special edition of Local Impact. And we've got a lot to unpack in this next hour. I'm Joyce, Estey, WRNJ's news director. Joining me this morning in the studio to discuss a very important issue. It is an issue that is affecting parts of northern New Jersey, specifically Jefferson Township School District. This issue we hope to get through in the next hour has two separate pieces of legislation that have really come together and had detrimental impacts on the Jefferson Township School District, which has since learned that there are other school districts that are suffering similar situations. My guest this morning, Morris County State Senator Anthony Bucco. Good afternoon, Senator. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Joyce.
And we also have joining us in the studio, Jefferson Township School District, Jeanne Howe. Good morning, the Superintendent of Schools. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate
Thank you for
that.
having me.
Executive Director of the Highlands, Ben Spinelli. Thank you for being here, Ben.
Always great to be here with you, Joyce.
And last but certainly not least, joining us this morning, Assemblywoman Dunn, also representing the Jefferson Township School District. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Okay. So the purpose of the whole situation is to try to bring all of you together and start to move toward resolutions, some kind of a solution for the situation. I'm going to start with you, Superintendent Howe. Maybe you can give us a brief synopsis of what Jefferson Township School District, the financial situation you find yourself in.
Thank you. After sustaining many years of cuts because of S2, which sought to reshuffle the funding for districts based on enrollment, making cuts over the last 10 years or so, we're faced with a significant deficit in order to make our budget work for next year. So when we do the rough calculations, we are about $4.8 million short. And to balance the budget and to make it work, we would have to have some devastating cuts into our budgets, our programs, and our schools.
And this has been after you've sold one school?
We have closed 3 schools in my time as superintendent in Jefferson, a total of 3 actually. About 12 years ago, one of our schools was converted to our central offices, which we're in the process of selling, and we have 2 other schools, one we're leasing.
But these, you call them kind of Band-Aids, are they not? This is not long-term.
Well, we have to keep the schools closed in order to keep our budget working. But I call them Band-Aids because we need a systemic change to the funding formula and how schools in general throughout the state are funded.
But this is also a problem that let's go back to the Highlands Water Protection and Planning Act. That was established back in 2004 for the sake of clean water. And of course, we have Ben here, and he's going to be talking about that a lot, about what this all means to the state. But protecting clean water, because the Highlands serve some 70% of the state, clean water is a noble cause, an excellent one. Okay, so it limited development. And then as a result of limited development, this is where I hear that there's these two, the S2 comes in, and these two sort of working against each other, causing this financial impact.
That is correct. So back in 2004, when the Highlands Act was implemented and passed, was my first year in Jefferson. I came in July of 2004. And when I came to the district, we were adding on to our schools. We were making the modular additions, permanent fixtures to our buildings. We built a huge gymnasium, had a connector between the middle school and high school at the time. So we were really bursting at the seams in terms of enrollment. Since then, our enrollment has declined significantly. However, you're talking about the funding formula and the Highlands Act. So our enrollment went down 29% over the course of S2, but our state aid was cut 60%. And we are thinking that it's because the wealth and income factor for our state aid formula has increased because there's lack of housing in Jefferson, which means the values of the home go up, which means that the state believes that the citizens of Jefferson and residents are able to pay more in taxes. but you don't realize the value or increase in wealth of your home unless you go to sell it. So just because your value goes up doesn't mean you have the ability to pay more in taxes.
Okay. So, I understand that, but what I don't understand, I guess, and I look to my state lawmakers about this, is the difference. Now, Senator, this has been going on for a very long time. The Highlands has been there since 2004. S2's been there since 2018. I mean, we're years into this now. Why has this gone on so long?
Well, first and foremost, let me say this, right? This is not a result, in the terms of Jefferson's part, of not sound management of the school system, right? I mean, we've seen the steps that they've taken in order to stay ahead of these budget cuts, right? So this isn't a result of them not making good decisions. This is a direct result of the Highlands Act and the inability to have development in Jefferson that would drive ratables and revenue for the township and the school district, and as a direct result of the decreasing enrollment and the increase in the values of the properties in Jefferson that send the funding formula into a tailspin. And this has happened all over the state. The funding formula has had impacts in many districts across New Jersey, but when you add the Highlands Act into it and the lack of development that goes along with it in order to protect the water, it's like the perfect storm. It's like two things converging together that makes it almost impossible for these school districts to survive. And we've seen it in Jefferson, and we've seen it in West Milford. We've seen it in Vernon. In Vernon. You know, all of these municipalities that have this lack of ability to add ratables and increase their revenue, and at the same time have decreasing enrollment because you don't have development of residential properties, and the decrease in funding that goes along with that under the S2 formula, you see a disproportionate decrease that has a direct impact on the school system's ability to make ends meet. And that's what we're facing here. And, you know, look, this has been coming over the years. And I can tell you that Republicans in the Senate caucus have been raising this issue year after year after year. In the early years, before S2 was enacted, when Governor Christie came on board and funding was when the budget was a difficult budget, in difficult budget years, let me say it that way, they held the funding formula level. They held everybody harmless. Today, they're operating the funding formula, and what's happening is these school districts are being cut dramatically. Like we said, we had a decrease in population in Jefferson, but a disproportionate amount of funding was cut. And it's a result of this formula that, quite frankly, even the legislators that put it together can't explain to you how it really works. And we need to have a new formula. And it's as simple as that.
It does seem rather convoluted.
And
I was trying to understand it myself.
And the Highlands Aid needs to be a part of that process. It needs to be a part of that formula. And, you know, the good news is I've had a meeting with the Commissioner of Education. She was gracious enough within her first week on the ground here in New Jersey to host a meeting with the Jefferson School District and with me. She's since asked for documentation from the school. That was delivered to her yesterday, and I'll give her till Monday to follow up. But look, we're moving forward. I also spoke with the chairman of the Education Committee, Senator Bucco. He's also interested in trying to figure out why this is happening. You know, why the disproportionate cuts. So, and he told me that we work together on a bipartisan basis on legislation that will correct it. So we're moving forward, but the bottom line is this. Just like no student should go to school and worry about where their next meal is coming from, no student should have to go to school and worried about whether or not their school is going to be funded for them to have extracurricular activities or play sports. This should not be a worry that students come home with at the end of the day. So I know that I will work diligently, along with my colleagues in the Assembly, to correct this. And I'm confident that we will be able to.
I mean, I remember fair school funding going far back as Senator Doherty had pushed that with Chris Christie during his first term, and it was supposed to be the hallmark of the second. It never happened. I mean, this is an issue that has been around for a very, very long time, and it just seems like, Jefferson, you're kind of like the epicenter right now of where this has come together, unfortunately, and taking its worst toll. Trying to,
But
okay.
I think people need to understand that this is not because of a lack of attention on the school district's part. I think that's really important for people to see. I mean, we're talking about a school district that's cut 100 positions, over time, closed 3 schools, eliminated many of the extracurricular or are now charging for participation in the extracurricular activities. So, this is not something that is a blame on the school district. This is something as a result of a bad funding formula and the impact of the Highlands coming together to create a perfect storm that leaves this school district in a position of being unable to survive.
We've got to take a break here, but when we return, I'm hoping that we can have the Executive Director of the Highlands, Ben Spinelli, weigh in on how they also have been working with hands tied with regard to funding. Our guests this morning are Ora Dunn, who is an Assemblywoman representing Jefferson Township. We have Jeanne Howe, the Superintendent of Schools, and you just heard from Senator Anthony Bucco. We'll be right back. And thanks for staying with us. We have a very important issue that we're discussing this afternoon, and that is the financial impact of the Highlands and S2 on the Jefferson Township School District. And we also have joining us this afternoon Executive Director Ben Spinelli. He is the Executive Director of the Highlands. And Ben, this is something that the Highlands was brought in 2004. You have suffered funding cuts over the years, and so. Tell us a little bit about how this affected Jefferson Township.
Sure, Joyce. Well, first of all, let's start with when the conversation turns towards the availability of ratables, we're confusing the issue here because no town in New Jersey has ever ratabled its way out of its tax issues, right? So the amount of development that can take place in Jefferson, there's still things that they can do to increase their tax base, right? And we've discussed it with the mayor and with the township planner before. They haven't taken advantage of those opportunities yet. They're there. But even then, that's not going to solve the basic problem, which is that there's a one-way flow of benefits from the Highlands outbound, something we've talked about many times before, right? That the state relies upon the existence of the Highlands to have the population densities and the economic development opportunities that characterize New Jersey that could simply not exist without the Highlands being in place. And so there is no return flow from the people who are the biggest beneficiaries of the protection of the region, right? The population densities in New Jersey, we already know New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country at 1,900 people per square mile over the entirety of the state. When you look at the diagonal between Bergen County and Camden County in New Jersey, the population densities are on the order of 11,000. We're going to Hudson County, where it's 25,000 people per square mile. You have places like Union City or Gutenberg, where it's at 50,000 or 62,500 people per square mile. We can't sustain those densities without protecting the water supply because the water's simply not going to come from those parts of the state. The people who live in the Highlands are providing a service to that part of the state without really paying the fair share for what that costs and what the obligations are and what the impacts are. right? There are fiscal impacts to the municipalities in the Highlands that can be addressed, right? But we have to understand that it's got to be part of a more comprehensive management of the region for the long-term protection of those resources, right? At some point in time, there's going to be a bill that comes due to New Jersey if we don't pay attention to this. And this is one of the places where you can see it. Now, there are a lot of different opportunities that are out there, and most of them would take a legislative fix. But the first one that you've been talking about, the school funding formula, is something that fits into a lot of the other things we've talked about before when it comes to the Highlands. Because of the resource protection necessities, things in the Highlands have to be treated differently. And that's why affordable housing was treated differently in the Highlands, why warehouse siting is treated differently in the Highlands, why school funding has to be treated differently in the Highlands. We put restrictions on how things are operating in this part of the state that need to be recognized in how we manage this for the portion of the state where the impact is, right? So if you're running a school district in the Highlands portion, you've got certain pressures that you're going to have to face that the state should be offsetting, right? The people who are benefiting from the money have to return some of the finances back to this region to offset those impacts. And we're not doing that. We're not doing it for local property taxes. We're not doing it for school funding. We're not doing it for a whole myriad of things. Open space acquisition. All these things simply are not being recognized in the greater picture.
I mean, we've got a similar situation in New York State where they have a watershed, Upper New York State, and they pay them $165 million a year. They're paying for that water. I mean, I know we don't like to talk about having to pay for water, but every little water bottle we pay for that. So why not pay for the?
That's the fundamental issue right there, Joyce. And what you have in Jefferson in particular is impacted by this because so much of their land is watershed land. City of Newark, City of Jersey City, the two biggest cities in the state, own a tremendous amount of land in Jefferson Township. Every year, those two cities go to Jefferson Township and ask for a rebate on their taxes. They go for a tax appeal because the land is only valued for its potential as development land. And we know that's not why that land was set aside back in 1900. The land does have tremendous value in terms of resource protection. Newark and Jersey City couldn't exist without that land being there. And what instead of doing what New York City does, New York City understands that land is an asset. They understand the towns in their watershed in the Catskills are providing a service to them. And they take from their ratepayer base and they offset the impacts to those towns because they understand those towns are doing them a service. And they pay full tax on the land in their 42 municipalities of the Catskill Delaware watershed. Instead, we have the landowners here in our state nickel and diming the towns that are the host to their lands. And we don't properly value that land. We don't look at the resource value of that land. Instead, we only look at the development potential of that land. And that land is providing green infrastructure that the best protection for water quality and water quantity is healthy forested land. Jefferson has plenty of it. It's some of the most rare lands that we have in the state and some of the most valuable lands that we have in the state. It's time that the taxes that were paid to the local municipality reflected that. There's a second place that we have money. That's from the watershed moratorium aid. And this is where a legislative fix could really make an impact. We have to recalculate how we determine how many acres are eligible for watershed moratorium aid. Even parkland in a place like Jefferson is providing water protection quality. We don't recognize that, right? So we have to look at how many acres are eligible for compensation, what the per acre compensation for that land is going to be, and then we don't even have to look very far for a funding source. The watershed moratorium aid right now comes from the realty transfer fee. When the Highlands Act came into place, the realty transfer fee portion that went to the Highlands Protection Fund was $14.4 million. Today it's $4.4 million. That land goes to the watershed moratorium aid and to the grant program that we have to offset the cost of complying with the Highlands Act that we provide to the municipalities. Jefferson's been a recipient of a lot of our grants, but it doesn't get to the core of how we are allocating the value of land and taxing that land to make sure that the income goes back. Both of those sources have the potential to offset whatever impact there is in Jefferson.
I used to live in Jefferson. I used to say water everywhere, but not a drop in sight. I mean, really, that's what the situation has been. Kudos to Newark and Camden for over 100 years ago coming up and going, you know what, we're going to need water. And they bought it and they did. And we've had Newark watershed up there forever, but it has got to change. And I'm asking our two lawmakers that are here today, what can be done to start to pay these municipalities for the very resource that they're benefiting from, instead of, like you say, nickel and diming them.
Hi,
Go
Joyce.
ahead.
All right.
Assemblywoman Dunn, go for it.
Well, I don't think we've explored how it's a complicated issue, right? It's complex, and there may not be one singular way to address it. But at least we're all here today, and we're having that discussion, broadening that coalition, increasing the awareness around the issue. I'm doing my part on the assembly side, right, with my colleagues there, whether it be on the education committee or the environment committee. I also met with the commissioner and representatives from the governor's office. And thankfully, our new governor, Cheryl, has represented Jefferson down in Congress. So she's been here frequently, is very familiar with our terrain and the challenges. So really hoping that's a sympathetic ear to this cause. And just given the response of the administration so far, I'm very hopeful for that. I've introduced legislation called the Clean Water Promise Act. And it's really the beginning of conversation, addressing the emergency need for the $4.8 million. Sorry, and I want to thank Superintendent Howe for in the beginning how you really got to the root issue, right, and identified that structural flaw in the school funding formula. So that's one aspect. And remember, there's the districts that received supplemental aid through that formula are described as overburdened communities. And I couldn't help but think about that. I said, this is a burden that this region of the state has. A good burden, by the way. It's a good burden, right? But nevertheless, it's a burden for providing that public good to really the rest of the state. So there's a responsibility to come back to this region for that. So I think that's one aspect. But addressing a deficit 1 year in an appropriation is not the long-term solution that we need. So I know we'll be working on other vehicles and other ways to address this, and hopefully we all come together on it. It's going to be a difficult budget year. We know that. The governor has her address on March 10th, and we'll probably be hearing about those challenges. The state has a $1.5 billion deficit, but this needs to be a priority. Look, when I take the oath, as do all of my colleagues, no matter what part of the state you're from, one, you're drinking clean water from the Highlands, and two, you take that same oath that says every child in this state has the right of a thorough and efficient education. And when we hear that all the recreational programs are going to be a limited, gifted, and talented programs, is that a thorough and efficient and a fair educational opportunity for the children in the state?
Yes, who's underserved now? I mean, really, that's kind of where you wonder, really, if that is. Senator,
there's also the political aspect of this, right? And that's really the heart of it. Essex County has a strong political delegation, Democrat delegation. This state has been under Democrat control for, 20 some years in the legislature, more than 20 years. For the last 8 years, we've had, the Democrats have had complete control. And when you look at some of the cities that are benefiting from this water, those are all very heavily Democrat controlled. So, in order to get legislation to change this, you're going to need those votes. And that is a strong block and trend. And that's reality. That's politics, and it's reality. It's unfortunate. I always say that politics should never stand in the way of good policy. But unfortunately, sometimes it does. And what our responsibility is to make the argument clear and concise and to win over enough folks to make sure that whatever we propose, we're able to move. And that's going to require bipartisan work. And that's what I've tried to start at this stage of the game by working with the Democrat chairman, not only on the environmental committee, but also on the education committee. So we'll work with those legislators, but there's also needs to be an understanding that this is just not something that you're going to look at a fix and say, okay, this makes perfect sense, now let's do it. Because there's going to be a lot of pushback from those folks that have to pay more.
Now, the Highlands all those years ago was dealing with, don't bring that back to you. All those years ago, the Highlands, which was another area that was limited in development, and down in South Jersey, the opposite ends of the state. And how have they survived all these years, that block?
Well, they're struggling too. You're seeing that now. They're struggling too. So this is across the board, and that's why it's going to take some hard work and some collaboration between both parties to make sure that we have a fix that will work, but that will also pass the legislature and get the signature of the governor.
Well, this governor has, as was mentioned earlier, her district included Jefferson. And so, I mean, that kind of gives you, I would hope anyway, a little leg up on her taking an interest in this.
Look, I've worked with Governor Sherrill now for a number of years. Her congressional district overlapped ours, and we worked together on many issues like Apacon, Picatinny, Arsenal, you name the issues, COVID, getting folks back to work, opening up our business community during COVID. We worked hand in hand. In fact, her and I wrote the initial business plan for reopening the economy, right here in Morris County, and delivered it to Governor Murphy at the time. And part of that report was utilized in his plan to reopen the state. So, we're familiar with each other. We work well together. But you got to understand, too, now she's the governor of the entire state of New Jersey. And there are certain portions of the state that, carry a gubernatorial election. Essex County, is one of those big counties. So, she's going to have competing interests here. But I'm confident she'll do the right thing, and we'll be able to work together to get something on her desk that she'll be able to sign.
I mean, because you think of housing and a town. One of the economic engines of a town is your school district. How well managed are your schools? What kind of an education is my child going to get if I'm going to go move to that area? I mean, you don't want to see these become deserted wastelands. They need to get the support that they need in order to continue, and that is part of the state.
It's absolutely true. But when you look at Jefferson and you realize that you have Route 15 running right up, through the center there, even into West Milford, there are areas that can and should be developed. And I think that I hear the chairman of the Highlands Council now saying that there's opportunities to do that. I encourage the council as well as Jefferson to work together to set those plans in motion, because that's one of the ways that will help in this situation. And there just doesn't make any sense to restrict the areas around that Route 15 corridor. Just doesn't make sense.
And Joyce, if I can add, Ben mentioned rural or, other parts like Jefferson, West Milford, where we as New Jerseyans in the Garden State view it as one that's who puts garden in the name of our state, but that we view it as rural, right? But by the true definition, if you were to look at how the federal government determines that, which is based on how funding allocations, right? There's not a single part of the state that is considered rural. So that's yet another resource barrier for us, right? So yeah, you described the level of density. So to think about really the burden that this area is taking on to ensure that there's clean water for the entire state is quite incredible. So I just wanted to highlight that we're not rural.
And eventually the faucet is going to run dry. I mean, because if towns like this are so affected, and we've talked about this, Ben, we're in a 2-year drought.
So Joyce, right, we get to the heart of the matter here, which is that in a state like New Jersey, in order to support the population that we have and the economic activity that we have in this state, we have to understand that we're in this together. That I said it before, the urban areas of the state couldn't exist without the Highlands. And for the first time, the conversation has come down to where the folks in Jefferson are saying, we acknowledge that we have an obligation to protect the water supply for the state. It's got to be returned by a similar recognition in the urban parts of the state that they are benefiting from this, right? And that benefit that you're realizing from this comes with a cost. And that cost has to be returned to offset and mitigate the impacts of protection of that resource. And that's got to come, right? When I spoke to the mayor of Jefferson a couple of weeks ago, I said, 850,000 people live in the Highlands. So that's a lot. I said, well, it's a lot until you realize what that means. It means 8.5 million people don't live in the Highlands, right? And 7 million of those people rely on the Highlands for their drinking water. And they're not paying the real true cost of protection of that, right? The Highlands throughout its history has been chronically underfunded, understaffed, and under-resourced. And it's well past time for that to change, right? We have to have the staff necessary to address the issues that are facing the region as a whole. Jefferson's just one of the 88 towns that I have to be cognizant of what the impacts are. We also have to be cognizant of the benefits flowing to 332 other municipalities in the state, right? So that's a big responsibility. It's got to be recognized at the legislative level, right? The urban portion of this state has to step up to the plate and protect their own citizens. That's really what comes out of this. Yeah, there's a benefit if they start to return funding to the Highlands to offset the impacts. But in reality, what they're doing is benefiting their own constituents who can't live where they are without the Highlands water. Right? And those two things go hand in hand. We should have 25 million constituents. 7 million people drink our water. Another 18 million people come visit the Highlands every year for recreation and entertainment and for shopping and all the other things, visiting farms, all the stuff that really makes New Jersey such a great place to live. We should have 25 million constituents who are eager to protect the resources here and eager to invest. And that's what it is. It's an investment in the future of the state. If we don't make this investment, there is going to be a bill that's going to come due, right? We've been fortunate that we've been able to make it through this 2-year drought with water still coming out of the tap. As the right, we ship out 863 million gallons of water a day to the rest of the state, regardless of whether we're in a time of plentiful precipitation or in the middle of a drought like we are today. I'm going to make you a bet, and I won't be around 20 years from now, that 863, I'm not working with them.
Okay.
So that I will make you a bet that 863 million gallon a day figure is going to be north of 1 billion gallons a day because the population of the state continues to rise outside of the Highlands, right? And so we're going to have to continue to protect and improve the resources here to make sure we can meet the demands of the state. There are no economic goals that we can reach as a state if we don't have drinking water. The urban parts of the state can't. The day will come if we go into a drought warning. There's going to be a halt on new building permits, right? You can't continue to develop if you don't protect the water supply. And there's got to be that recognition, right? At some point in time, we've got to come across the divide and sit down and look each other in the eye and say, we both benefit from this. We have to take care of it. The urban areas of the state are an economic engine that makes the quality of life in New Jersey possible. The Highlands is a portion of the state that allows that economic engine to even exist in the first place. And there's got to be the quid pro quo going on where there's a recognition of that.
We got to take a break here. We have a lot more to
Yeah, I know.
discuss. I
You
hope
did say
everyone.
the hour would go quickly.
Absolutely, it is just an hour and it is fleeting. We're going to take a break here. We'll be right back. And thanks for staying with us. We certainly have a lot that we've been talking about with regard to the financial impact that two pieces of legislation out of Trenton have really had on Jefferson Township and the Highlands Region, a lot of towns up in the rural section of the state. My guests this morning are Ben Spinelli, who is the Executive Director of the Highlands. We also have State Senator Anthony Bucco joining us. Jeanne Howe is the Superintendent of Schools at Jefferson. And Ora Dunn is Assemblywoman who represents Jefferson Township down in Trenton as well. So when we went to break, you were kind of just about to jump in.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And your introduction of me reminds me, the senator and I, we represent a district. It's the freshwater district, right? We have lakes, and everybody thinks about the shore, but we have the freshwater coast here, and just tremendous natural resources. And I wanted to thank Ben Spinelli for giving us that real overview and talking about the necessary investment. Translation, value, right? Are we as a people, the state of New Jersey, placing a value on protecting our drinking water and this resource? And in, 2004, when the plan came out, there was a recognition that, yes, we do value this. And there were recommendations made on how the state should uphold that value. Hence, the legislation I introduced called the Clean Water Promise Act. It's a promise that was made 20 years ago, but the state has not delivered on that. And it's time that we deliver on that.
It seems like this would be a good question to take to the voters overall in the state. Because anytime you take a question to the voters about preservation, they usually give it a great big thumbs up. Is that right? This is a resource that is very much like that. We need this resource, and it does need a very minor tax in order. I hate to even use that dirty word,
Well,
tax.
we don't like to use the word tax, but the bottom line is this, right? We see year after year the state squander money for projects that, have really no necessity, other than being something for a legislator's district that some municipality thinks they need. We're talking about gazebos and,
A French museum.
a French museum in Jersey City that they don't, the money gets allocated and they don't even spend it. I mean, in the last hours of the Murphy administration, in the last voting session, there was a bill to appropriate $128 million of the final money that he had left in his administration. And despite the Republican opposition, the bill passed and that money was spent, right? Think of the good that we could have done with that money in this particular process, right? I'll give you another example. Shortly after that voting session, and right before the close of the Murphy administration, I was on a call with the Department of Community Affairs talking about the homeless situation, because it's a growing problem in Morris County. And what I was told is because of some funding formula changes at the federal level, the agencies that deal with this issue were going to be about $8 million short between January and June. And I said to the folks on the call, I said, shame on you guys. How could you have known this and allow the administration, which you're part of, to propose spending $128 million and not earmark some of that to cover the shortfall? And so I'll say it again, shame on the administration for not taking some of that $128 million to start addressing some of these problems. COVID was a horrific time in the state's history. But during that time period, the state received billions and billions of dollars from the federal government, and we squandered it. If there was ever a time in the state's history where we would have had an opportunity to fix some of these glaring problems, that was the time. We could have fixed structural deficits. We could have changed some of the funding mechanisms for the Highlands, for the school funding formula. That money was found money. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's gone. Our budget has increased $20 billion over 8 years. And what do we have to show for it? Zero. And
Continuing problem.
that's the real problem.
I got to jump in at this point, Joyce, because when you talk about those kinds of dollars that were available, I'm operating an agency that protects the water supply for 7 million people. I'm doing it in 2026 with the same budget that we had in 2011. You show me an operation that can that can be effective with that kind of budgeting, right? That it's not responsible to do it that way. When you think about the funds that are out there, like I said before, a lot of fixing the problems of the Highlands and how we operate and making us effective doesn't really involve new sources of funding. It's allocating money that already exists and giving it to us to do the job of protecting the comprehensive job. It means agriculture, it means forestry, it means managing the towns, right? There are so many things that fall under that purview. I don't want to go here, but New York City spends $108 million a year managing the Catskill Delaware watershed. $108 million a year. We're supposed to get the same results that they get on $3 million a year, right? That's a crazy expectation, and it's the future of the state we're talking about, protecting the Highlands, and going back to some of the perception of urban versus rural, or one part of the state versus another. First of all, we're not a big enough state to have that kind of divide, number one. But the understanding that you cannot have one part of the state without the other, that there's an obligation that flows back and forth, right? That making an investment in the Highlands is an investment in the future of the state. Everyone in New Jersey benefits from protecting the Highlands. It's not a regional issue, it's a statewide issue. And it's high time the state put their money behind our work to ensure that the next generation of New Jerseyans is not going to face the kind of issues that they're facing out in the Colorado River Basin right now, right? We should be smart enough and forward thinking enough that we're thinking 50 years from now or 100 years from now. And that's part of the problem, is we're in the future business, right? When we do things, we're talking about protecting the state in 2075. That's not a really politically popular way to look at things, but it's a necessity. And our job is to make sure that the state is going to be livable and prosperous well into the future, that my children, my children's children are going to be provided for. That should be an easy political sell, but unfortunately it never is, because the here and now of today often gets in the way of doing things that are important for the future. And we've got to change that approach.
Superintendent Howe.
Thank you. So, Ben, you said that you're in the future business. So is education, right? And if we are not able to get impact aid for the Highlands or immediate changes to the funding formula, we're looking at significantly impacting our operations of our schools, the programs that we have. We're looking at gifted and talented elimination, elimination of basic skills, courtesy busing. Jefferson is not a walkable district. And having lived there, you know that, that there's a lot of windy roads without sidewalks, street lights. We're looking at class sizes in K-5 of over 30 students in a classroom. We're looking at reduction of extracurricular activities, places for kids to go after school, and we're looking at elimination of our total athletics program. So I agree, right? We need to be forward thinking. We are also in the future business, preparing our students to be productive citizens moving forward and after they leave the walls of Jefferson. So we desperately need help in our schools.
What are you faced with, Superintendent, if help doesn't come, if the cavalry doesn't get here in time? And what is Jefferson faced with?
We really have three options. Number one is to make those cuts. Those cuts are not recommended. I truly believe those cuts are harmful to students, and then subsequently harmful to the community, right? Our schools' performance goes down, people won't move into Jefferson, the property taxes or property values go down, so that really isn't a feasible option. But again, mostly it's because it's harmful to students. We would be able to go out for a special question. That was something the board considered, but the way that the language is written is that if you go out for a special question and those items in that question are defeated, you can't include them in the budget. So for example, if we put athletics as a special question, it went down, the taxpayers voted it down, we wouldn't be able to have it. And our third option is to submit an unbalanced budget. State monitor would come in and make all financial decisions on behalf of the district. So we're really in a no-win situation.
And that's just for this time frame that's coming up.
Correct.
That's not future. This is just dealing with the here and now.
Correct. I've been asking for impact aid since 2019. I've been asking for changes to the funding formula since 2019. And here we are at the end of the road. And I use the analogy that I truly believe that all school districts in New Jersey are on the road to a fiscal cliff. I think because of disproportionate cuts for S2, the Highlands Act, Jefferson got pushed to the end of the road first, but I really do believe that we're all on that same road. You can't have increases in healthcare of 28% and only be allowed to raise the tax levy 2%.
Right.
It's not
Other communities
sustainable.
going to share that same precipice in a very near future.
Correct.
And so, and this is why I was hoping that we would come together, and I do appreciate each and every one of you for being here today to really talk about this so that you can sort through it to lead to some kind of resolution. It's in, you know, and I commend you for coming out and telling everybody about this in your school district so that this could come to the attention of those that will make differences, such as, you know, hopefully Senator Bucco, who works so diligently. He is our minority leader in the Senate, and we need, you know, Assemblywoman Aura Dunn to also speak volumes as well. So Ben, thank you for being here. This has been a very worthwhile time.
Always happy to join.
Okay, we do have about another, I'll say another minute. You know, Senator, do you have anything that you, how we, where do you see it going from here?
Well, listen, we'll continue to work very hard in Trenton. We'll use the resources of the Highlands Council and the resources from Jefferson and the information that we get to try to come up with a workable solution that we can implement. And I'm confident that we'll get there. So this is something that cannot be ignored. You know, educating our children is one of the highest priorities, and we pride ourselves in this state of having one of the best public education systems in the country, and we can't let that slip. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we continue to give our schools, including Jefferson and West Milford, the resources they need to provide a thorough and efficient education for every child.
I thank you again for being here this morning. I hope everyone understands that the very water they're drinking is so important, as is the education of our students. And this has been Local Impact on WRNJ, Hackettstown, Washington.